Why does it feel as if the legal system is pathetic? What is it about the modern system which engenders no faith and hope that there'll be retribution and vengeance against criminal scum for the activities, the malfeasance that they're committing in these ways? Well, it's because we have a feminized judicial system, and this stems from several things. Particularly, it's a byproduct of the liberal tradition the Anglosphere has been beholden to for the last 200 years, where we've seen mercy and equivalent feelings, pity, become the primary virtue judgment of someone's ability to be forgiving and to be, as I said, merciful. So these things to us are vestiges of a system which works in a homogenous society where the feeling of shame, of guilt, of consolation, commiseration, some sort of chagrin, anything that relates to how you would feel contrite to committing these crimes and doing these appalling behaviors. Now, when you have people who don't like you as a person, as a people, as a culture, who don't participate, who don't belong, and who basically are affronted by the very nature of your legal system in that way. As I say, we don't behave in your ways, and we don't need to legally abide by those decisions and feel the same way about these things. So you're left with punishment, and punishment is very visceral, and it is universal. Every system exists globally for punishing criminals, so in every social community group, you have to have a dissuasion or aversion to crime. For some methods around that would be obviously physical harm. It's very easy to understand. Even the most intellectually challenged peoples understand pain, and so if you can mete out pain in any way, then you're able to hopefully scare other ne'er-do-wells in their potential thoughts around committing said acts. So whether this is effective or not is obviously up for discussion. But I think in general there's an agreed upon concurrence around that crime requires a punishment. Why, though, does the West feel as if it's specifically bad is because, as I said, liberalism has bestowed upon us a system which no longer is feasible, no longer works. But it's also twofold. There is an undercurrent here around the feminization of the legal system. So from both angles, you have the progressive tendency of the liberal utilitarians, especially whether they are apologists directly, or you could think maybe more tacitly understanding utilitarianism in that way. Then you also have the feminization of a system. And you can see here just a graph around, and this is in the US, the amount of male to female judges, respective of the balance, basically, and this is on the broader legal system. And then the same plotted line here, it starts in 1972, the death sentences. So I've tried to arrange it, but you can see the correlation here, and this is fairly linear, I would say. I didn't run the regression. I can tell you, though, that the R squared is probably somewhere with the 70-80 percentile, where we say, look, there's a huge increase in female judges coinciding with a huge decrease in death sentences meted out. So the appetite for people to kill other people for crimes has lowered. Now, whether the populace is better off, I think is not true. We can debate that. But I think there's also the recognition that as a punishment, once you've killed somebody for something, there is no reversing it. So what if you're wrong? This is always the moral, ethical argument made by defenders of abolishing the death corporal punishment in that way. So it feels barbaric, and that's what gets shoved in your face, is as if barbarism is not good. When we can say barbarism just is. The moral rectitude and fundamentally axiological approach you take to barbarism, to savagery, is unique. It's for you. It's your own. It's how you feel, and you may not like it, but that doesn't mean I don't have to, or maybe I do like it. So the idea that barbarism alone is, and because it obviously has a lot of connotations, it's a loaded term. It can be used as a euphemism for certain things, but we're saying it's barbaric to commit corporal punishment against someone who's done something. That just hasn't always been true. That's not a given. And you can see here, well, I've taken out punishments in Anglo-Saxon England because in the West we derive many of our legal systems off of jurisprudence that stems out of, particularly around property, and personal property is in entitled to recompense, and that includes you as a person, that's personal property, and rights under the king. So the king is obviously the traditional sovereign in this state to decide. They were the almighty judge. Nowadays, obviously, we have judges who serve in absentee of the king, or at least in lieu of the king. There's a legal court proceeding which is done in front of a judge who's meant to uphold the certain strictures that the king previously would have abided by. But nevertheless, in Anglo-Saxon England, you can see that corporal and capital punishments were very often meted out, and that their issuance was for, obviously, in one aspect, revenge. You need to be punished for your crime, and thus you would hope that there's some balancing in the universe, cosmic balance. And then also it's about marketing and advertising. You put off criminals from certain acts, not all. Some acts are brash and done out of not malice, pre-planned, you could say, but or premeditated, but are done out of the spontaneity of being somewhere at some time, feeling something and doing something. Like murdering someone is obviously separated into manslaughter and premeditated murder, because obviously there's a notion that you can kill someone accidentally or in the moment, versus I've planned to kill someone and gone ahead and done that across the course of many moments, days, weeks. So that's the idea, that there is this separation around how we feel about punishment in general, and why punishment is oftentimes chosen, and what severity of punishment, how it is correspondent to the crime itself, and the level of crime we consider the most egregious, obviously, is now the ones that we wanted to dissuade people from committing, and that's usually murder, whereby you would pay weregild or botgild if it was an injury, thereby giving money instead of blood, because obviously the king is interested in not losing. Typically men commit most violent acts, and have done so obviously since time immemorial, because the way that societies are structured, men are the most violent. It's genetic, and so we understand this, but also understand that there needs to be some continuity and community cohesiveness around. You can't have violent reprisal and tit for tat bloodletting, because you'll eventually have everyone murdering everyone else for reasons that you can see in gang feuds and things like that, where it's perennial violence that never really is satisfied, because there's always some grudge and there's always some reckoning to be had, because you've murdered my friend, now I murder your friend, now we've got two enemies, and this is the Romeo and Juliet basically rendition of the instances of why violence is now tried to be settled. It's like, no, this is stopping now, and this is how we're going to do that. And to do it with money is one way to abstract out of, you could say, the feeling involved with murder, particularly crime in that way. I would say if someone murdered my brother, I would want them murdered back. But if you could say, no, look, that's not okay, we're not doing that anymore, you will, however, get a settlement, and that's comprised of X amount of money paid by the committing offender, then you may not be satisfied, but there has to be the notion of what we call justice. And this is now the social contract application of justice. And we say, no, look, everyone now abides by what the king has determined is the social contract of justice. And that leads us to now have to understand that, as you probably all know, that the punishment now has to fit the crime from a legislative standpoint and then a judicial and juridical standpoint thereafter. Say, like, here's the sentencing guideline. The sentencing should be meted out according to these conditions, and that is now the final ruling by the judge, unless there is an appeal or some such notion. But I think that goes a lot in the way of hopefully giving context on why we feel as if there's been in the Anglosphere, a slide or maybe a glozing of corporal punishment as it befits most crimes. However, and this is to say that that's just an Anglo tradition which is now seeped and infested and infected the rest of the West, and you can see here the abolishment of capital punishment, starting in Portugal in 1849, and Sweden in 1910, all the way through to Latvia in 2012. They've all abolished the idea of corporal capital punishment for that reason. It's seen as barbaric. We're in this ethical realm of you couldn't possibly kill someone as the state because you don't have the moral grounds to do that for this and that reasons. Is society better off from murdering career criminals? obviously. And because you can make the argument in several ways. First, it's economic. Why would you want to keep someone alive that has no hope of getting out and returning to normalcy and like contributing to society? What benefit does anyone have from keeping this person alive in a small cell? It is just pointless. It's a ruse to make you feel as if that there's some sort of humanity or some sort of rectitude around the decision. We're having scruples on, look, we're keeping this person alive, so don't feel bad, even though they murdered their family or they murdered someone or they committed treason. Why? Do you actually feel better about that? I mean, I feel as if that's just a waste of resources, economically speaking. So we have the economic argument, which falls flat. We say, look, this is a very poor economic decision. If I did the benefit cost analysis and made this very materialistic, I could tell you it's worth just killing these people. It's not worth keeping them around forever. The second argument is the ethical argument, the moral standing on whether we consider it barbaric or not. I think this also, once again, falls flat because we have this understanding that morality is a spook. It is something conjured out of what we considered, I would say, a post-Enlightenment, Christian-tinged, theological underpinned societal disposition around violence is bad, full stop. If you commit violence in any way, shape or form, it should be defensive and nevertheless has to be justified. You have to have justified violence, because if you don't, then it's irrational. We don't like irrationality. We therefore require it to be punished, and punishment should be the commensurate to whatever act it is. And you can see the irony here, and it's almost lost on them, that being violent against violence is seen as a fitting punishment if it's meted out in ways that feels good, it's satisfying, it's satiating. And so like a huge amount of media in America is around prisons and gangs and jails and things like this. And it's like, well, look, he'll get prison justice. He'll get raped. He'll get beaten. And that is somehow less barbaric than the state just shooting someone in the head. It's very peculiar. It's almost preposterous, truly. If you think about what the paradox is here around feeling that way and then knowing those things, why would you need this to happen? Why would you want another man to rape another man for your own feeling of justice rather than just having him in a firing squad or taking a short drop and a long stop? What exactly is better about this situation from a moral standpoint? It's very hard for me to understand why you would want this to be something that is condoned and at least tacitly approved by wider, broader society. Look, this child molester is going to get his due just desserts in prison, but he could just be shot in the head. So why would we bother? Like, we just get it done, right? Like, what's the effect here of, okay, yeah, but now he's still alive anyway. Yeah, he had a bad time for, being raped. Obviously, he's horrible, but like, what's the upshot here is that he's still alive, and there's no ability to engineer an outcome where anyone's actually satisfied. It's like, oh no, I feel better now. And then if he's not raped, what then? You're basically holding out hope that he gets raped, and that's a very weird moral position to be taking. I think like one utilitarian will make the argument that this is the case, that it's beneficial, but utilitarianism is moronic. It's for imbeciles. So I just don't understand this ethical position. I don't think you can make a good argument for it. And so I would also try to stay away from making that stance and taking that position. Now, we can also say that it's lacking deterrence. If I know I'll commit a crime and the worst thing is I'll be locked up for 20 to 30 years and maybe get out on good behavior, I'll maybe get out on appeal, or maybe have a chance for X, then it's not as alarming. It's not as dissuading, is it? The thought that maybe I'll get away with it, and even if I don't, I only go to jail for X amount of years. Jail won't be too bad because most of my friends are there because I'm a third worlder, and that's where all the third worlders congregate when they're not on the outside. They're all in jail. Which also proposes the instance of why create a jail. Jails historically, obviously, institutions which reflect the society that made them. And so when they're vestiges, when they're carryover and they're traditions like this, we're very sentimental about why they exist. It makes sense in 18th century England, perhaps, to have a jail, to have this prison for these reasons. Doesn't make sense in modern day when you have to shelter and house and feed third worlders? Like what is the hope here? That they're going to be released back into the broader society better? You think that these guys are rehabilitating themselves in prison, in jail, in the UK, in America? Does it seem like that's possible? No, of course not. If anything, they get worse. There's just as much ill and abusive behavior that goes on behind bars as they would in the outside. And if anything, you're putting more people at risk, letting them back out. So once again, it's a misunderstanding of why an institution exists and having it just as a vestige, as a carryover effect, rather than reducing this to an actual issue that it is and saying, how can we solve this? If I was presented with this problem today, I have tomorrow someone who murdered someone, I don't have a jail, and I don't have a judicial system that's afraid of the death penalty. What would I decide to do if this person is likely to commit this crime again? Potentially it's a gang member who's gone out and shot 2 or 3 of his rival gang members. Why wouldn't I have this person hung? What is the hope around keeping this person alive for any reason? It's like, we're obviously assuming guilt here, and I'm happy to preserve some semblance of innocent until proven guilty. I think that can be a different argument. We can take a different day. But in general, most of these sentences, it can be done post, obviously, post outcome. So they're decided upon and then they sentence. So going into it, you would know that this person's guilty, therefore I can design a sentence that should reflect the justice part. And the justice part has to be taking that twofold. I need to punish the person, the malefactor, but I also need to promote the idea that if you do these things, you will be killed yourself. And if that is not the case, then you're allowing for the flourishment of crimes that are specifically allowed to not be punished adequately. You're just saying there's no deterrence here. There's no reason around why I would feel any compunction of committing these crimes other than, oh, I get a slap on the wrist. And this is what you do see. You see career criminals. And I've seen statistics, and I don't have it here, but according up to 60, 70, 80% of all crimes are committed by people who are multi-felons, as in they commit most of the crimes over and over and over again. And we for some reason, fail to see this as a necessary problem that requires capital punishment. Why would we not just kill these people? What benefit is their existence to us socially? It's presenting an ethical dilemma only because you're allowed to be an ethical dilemma. You're saying that I feel bad about the killing a career criminal who's making all of us worse off because I feel bad about killing. So, stop feeling bad about killing. Like these are just moral spooks. You've just said that these things are true, but they haven't historically been true. We attribute certain value to life now that we never have previously for reasons that are unbeknownst to you. You're just brought up, inculcated in these moral feelings. It's, for you, ecological. It's good or it's bad. But these are nonsense terms. They don't actually mean anything. And you can take historical evidence, you can take international, global evidence from different countries. People in the non-West will still murder, kill criminals. They'll cut their hands off for stealing. They don't see anything wrong with that. And I don't see why we have to approach this as the wise, sage, and hopefully holier than thou Westerner. We're so self-righteous that was like, no, we could not possibly envision ourselves murdering as the state career criminals. It's pathetic. Carl Schmitt even justifies this as the idea that sentencing, in particular punishments, are political. They're not legal at all. So we have outsourced you could say the moral burden to the legal system. We've said, look, now the legal system decides on punishments, not me. Don't worry about it. It's a system designed to function. But politics is to blame or to be the owner of these decision making. You need to understand that if you're a politician, you should be pushing for capital punishment because you're the one that decides these things. It isn't the legal system. The legal system just follows suit. These are all ants marching 2 by 2 when they're told to march certain ways. This is obviously goes into a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to ever be a lawyer or a judge, because you have no brain. You don't think. You recite and you memorize and then you recant and then you have all this sort of, you would say, pedantic or semantic maneuvering, but you don't actually create anything. You're not driving anything. You're just reflecting a system that exists. But a politician can actually guide these things and say, look, no, there won't be any more getting away with these things. if you're guilty of these crimes, and these are the list of crimes that we feel as if require capital punishment, then that's what's going to happen. Treason, for some reason, is now not even a capital punishment in America. You have large amounts of Chinese and Iranian and other perfidious spies basically stealing IP and intelligence and all of these things. And the American government says, yeah, but now you're arrested. Worst case, they go to Guantanamo Bay. And obviously, once again, you're advocating or like you're permitting torture as this sort of halfway house for making or justifying reasonable punishments. Have them shot. Be done with it. Many other countries do this. You find someone for treason, you shoot them in the head. Well, what is the idea here? That the immoral implication of treason is that you're trying to undermine the state to such a degree that the state feels as if it's being threatened. It's basically equivalent to war, like non-violent war. Why would you allow enemy soldiers, partisans, to behave and act like this in your own country? This is peculiar, no? We've gone into a state, once again, that we're just more than fine and happy to say, like, no, there's other outcomes. We'll just jail them. We'll just put them in prison. Does this weakness, does this smack of like an effete feminized system? Yes, of course. Because we can always rehabilitate, we can always care for, we can always make sure that there's a turning around. There is this idea of the redemption arc of the criminal. No, these people are not redeemable. What is it, 98% of these cases where the person is just pure scum? Be done with it. Judge Dredd had the right idea. You think that that's a dystopian nightmare? That's real justice being done in the moment in a way that's effective. You harness what the tools you have, which is state-backed violence, and you actually use them such that the rest of the populace lives in better environments. They don't have to feel and be threatened by career criminals who will continue to make these egregious crimes happen. It's committing violence against people who are justifiably on the receiving end of violence. They should be shot in the head. Like, I don't, and I'm hoping that most of you are not unveiled by the state's current system to not understand this. I'm assuming most of you are awake to the idea that the state has fallen under this trap, under this pseudomorphosis from, I would say, not even a softening, but a feminizing of the system. One harsh requirement of the legal system was that it made sure that we stayed safe as a community. I don't think many of you, or many of your friends, family members, would feel safe going into these neighborhoods. You can't tell me that huge amounts of gang violence and rape gangs and career criminals of every color and sort continuing to operate because the biggest threat to their behavior, their comeuppance, is going to be a slap on the wrist or a pathetic amount of time spent in prison with their friends. So I think that that's probably the summary here, is to say, like, look, this is it. We either bring back the death penalty and make crime punishment appropriate again, or we just soften and eventually we just don't punish anybody for anything, and a crime becomes a misdemeanor and a misdemeanor has become nothing, and then we've failed completely as a society to uphold what was, and I would say, once the most lauded and adulated justice systems in the world.